Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to ramble on for a bit about the build collection and the updates that it received with this season. As always, when the season starts, I usually go through the build collection fully and just make some of the changes. Some of course, are pertaining to new brands or gear sets coming in, and some are more just things I wanted to maybe change because I've been running a build and I've felt like, let's go this way instead of this way, or, sometimes rebalance changes, although we have none of those for this season. We'll go over it by character, as that's how the build collection is kind of set up. And as we go through, I'll just point out some of the changes that we've made, and also we'll go into some of the numbers and why I've made the decisions the way that I've done them. So yeah, let's go get started. And let's first start by actually explaining what the build collection is and kind of also how it is set up, because that part may not be known to everybody. But yeah, the build collection, I feel if you know me, you likely know the build collection as I'm closely tied to it. And what it is a Google Drive folder where we're keeping some Google drawings. And on those drawings are basically the full layouts of builds. So you can copy and from here basically. And everything that I think is needed to copy a build is basically here, so that we can see all of the stats on all of the pieces, the brands, things like what talents are being ran, the stats, and usually as well some of the damage numbers, so we can kind of as well compare even with the build collection itself. For instance, there's a Habsburg version of a hotshot setup in here as well, and yeah, they line up to there. And then the way that it is set up, actually, as that might not be too clear for everybody, it goes from 1.01 and then here to 1.116, and then keeps repeating, but then with, for instance, here 2.01 all the way to 2.16, and then yeah, the 3.01 to 3.16, and it goes all the way up to 5.16. Now, this should give away what they are. The number before the dot is the character number, basically. So 4 characters of main account, 1 character of my second account, and they are the ones represented here. And there's 16 loadout slots in the game, of course. So 01 to 016 representing those loadout slots. And that's showing as well how I have it in my on my builds. So for instance, yeah, there we had opened a hotshot build. If we actually take it into the game, this is character 1. If we go all the way up to their first slot, it is a hotshot build. Although generally there is a little bit of, for instance, differences there. I have a Nemesis as the secondary, but just to have multiple weapons around, I just save it like this. The Nemesis is always going to stay in my inventory anyway. And then for some things as well, like this Negotiator TurDro hybrid, I have it saved with 5 pieces like this, just so I can either put in a Coyote or a Memento to have both variants that I have kind of on the build picture. Now, of course, showing it like this would make no sense, so we're kind of showing both different versions of it. With a Coyote is actually how the main build picture is set up. But generally, what I have in the build collection is what I have in the game available to me. And if we go back here, then there's also a few builds here that are labeled with an S at the start. Those are builds that live in the stash. So for instance, several of the purple builds, they just live in the stash and I just grab them when I need them. Then there's also some that are marked with X, and this is just X builds, and literally just that. These are builds that used to be in the collection and no longer are, but I still wanted to keep their build picture around. Either it is linked somewhere on a like, for instance, a video or something, or even I don't per se think that they're bad builds. It's just, they're kind of maybe outdated, or, they've been superseded by something else, but they might be an easier way to get them. For instance, I think there is a raid build in here that, for instance, doesn't use the chill out raid tank that doesn't use the chill out. So yeah, we kind of keep that as a version to kind of, when the chill out isn't available, so that people can put one together. Then as well, there's a recommended build list, and this is actually where I would recommend people to start. That is a list, as not everything in the build collection is actually really great to run. There's a 511 build in there. There's like Red Eclipse in there and such builds that can be enjoyable to try to play and try to get the most out of them, but they're definitely not very effective. So those don't make it into the recommended build list. In the recommended build list, I have stuff that I feel works well. I can, wholeheartedly recommend them to other people. Then as well, there is actually some folders here at the top. that are recommended folders for instance, yeah, Striker, Negotiator, HeadHuntersFury, Eclipse, and such, where there's several builds in here. For instance, we've got in the Eclipse one, several recommended builds and several recommended layouts. These are especially here for me to add some extra layouts that I, for instance, with the Negotiator, I have 2 in the collection, but yeah, we can it'll set up Negotiator in several ways. So just to have that. Also, yeah, if you normally go into there, you'll see it as a list mode. If you want to see it as the grid mode that I have it here, yeah, you just press that grid button up there. Yeah, let's go get started. As always, of course, I'll link to everything we'll discuss here, all of the build pictures I'll link to, and of course, everything will be timestamped so you can jump around to your heart's content. Let's go get started by looking at character 1 and some of the builds that got changed on them. And let's start here with 1.09. as that is the Redfactor that we showcased as well last season. And I've actually made some changes to it, as especially that Redfactor existed to work with last season's modifier, where we could have an overcharge from the modifier. We don't have that this season anymore, so I've taken it actually to be a turret drone hybrid, or a TurDro hybrid, as I tend to call them in this layout. And the TurDro hybrids are basically with a sacrifice chest, generally glass chest, just because that will apply both to the weapons and the turret and the drone in this case. And then we have enough yellow cores that with Technician we're reaching 6 skill tiers. We have, of course, 5 on gear and then 1 from Technician. And then a memento, especially generally. For instance, with the Negotiator, we're actually taking the Negotiator backpack. But here, yeah, the memento is, of course, a really good tool for this, as it does also apply to the weapon and also to our skill. So this actually works out pretty well. It isn't as effective as, of course, on the healing end as a full-on, full-blooded refactor version. But especially once the memento is charged up, once we are kind of, getting going, we can actually do some decent damage, both on the weapon and we still have a decent chunk, and our turret drone hit decently hard enough as well to, for instance, heal our team up if we're just roaming, doing some control points, doing some things like that. And for instance, with this season, with cool skills, we can have to pop the drone, for instance, before we actually reach our engagement, and then wait out the cooldown for the turret and put that down, of course. And having it set up this way works out pretty well. And yeah, I kind of, especially now that we don't have that overcharge, I am kind of leaning towards having it in this way. And this can be kind of, yeah, in the same sense as like a combat medic or such. It can do the healing part, for instance, for no regen and such. But in its full red state, it wasn't that effective without last season's modifier. So yeah, we're definitely taking it now to become with some yellow cores. And yeah, setup-wise, the rest of it stays the same. We are still trying to hit a decent crit chance crit damage. We can do so with the capacitor. That's actually why we're also going with that. And this is also then kind of set up around the capacitor to begin with, so that we can get some of the decent numbers. The capacitor having 10 crit chance and 30 crit damages from mods. A minor change to this one, but yeah, one that I did want to highlight here. And going to 1.13, this with Imminence Armaments coming in. Some of the pistol builds, of course, were going to get touched by that. Especially this one. This is a high-end TechTank for pistols with bulwark, basically. It is a TechTank, but then with a bulwark. I've been enjoying this build quite a bit, actually, last season in its old variant where it had a Pica Rose and a second piece of Brazos together with a Grupo piece, and then with 2 blue cores on it, together with the blue and the yellow from the memento, one tier from Technician, and then of course 1 skill tier from the brand bonuses. We're landing on a 3-tier Artificer and a 6-tier shield. Here we're taking out that 2-piece Brazos and the Grupo and replacing them here with the Imminence Armaments as we have them here. In doing that, yeah, we're taking it now down to still a 6-tier shield, but it is 2 yellow, 4 blue, and in that case as well, we have 4 blue, of course. And the Artificer is dropping down to 2 skill tiers, but especially on the Bulwark, that's perfectly fine. The Bulwark is so survivable that it's still getting healed for 42% of it every 10 seconds. It's basically, unless you're getting hit by a ton of things, it's not easily breaking. And yeah, this is especially built around having a pistol build that is more crit chance, crit damage based. It isn't a headhunter style. It isn't something like that. We're just playing it as a shooter build. We're clicking a lot, of course, because yeah, pistols were not made automatic the way that rifles and such are. And this build with Imminence Armaments actually has gained quite a bit. If we zoom out a little bit, I'll also link to this spreadsheet, and this is kind of the spreadsheet that I used for a few of the calculations. There isn't actually too many here, because honestly, not too many builds changed, and also I have actually two Headhunter builds, which I'll link separately as well. We'll discuss their calculations in a different one, because I didn't want to import that into this. If we look and actually zoom in, just so it's a little bit more readable, this is actually the calculations used for coming to the decision here. If we had gone with other choices, so here, for instance, I was looking at having one DNH piece, having the Fox's Prayer stay in there, which we actually, the final version is actually this top one. Fox's Prayer, 1-piece DNH, Memento, and 3-piece Imminence Armaments. And what we see there is, yeah, that actually if we, for instance, go instead of the Fox's Prayer with a Grupo, we would lose a tiny bit. And the difference between them isn't actually that large. And especially if we were to drop the detox rate actually below, let's say, to a 90%, as we have it here, then the Grupo actually would win. That's how close the Fox's Prayer and the Grupo are here, especially because we still have a crit chance on the backpack slot that we could swap to a crit damage. That's usually the place where a Fox's Prayer might not make the difference. In the end, I did go with the Fox's Prayer in that slot, just to keep it pretty simple. And also I want to keep a red cord Fox's Prayer around on that character for other builds, because they don't have it saved in other builds. And that's actually the reason I went with that choice. The difference between them is, of course, very minimal. Then as well, I looked at the punch trunk, because of course we have that DNH piece on the chest as we have it. If we kind of look at it in the game, it's kind of laid out like this. We could, of course, that the positioning of the Imminence Armaments pieces and the DNH piece doesn't per se matter. I, of course, already had this DNH chest, so I'm keeping it to that. But what if we went with the punch trunk instead, of course? So basically swapping the DNH piece to the mask and becoming a punch trunk. What it turns out actually is that we would need around 36% headshot rate. As you can see, they're kind of perfectly on the same 100%. If we, for instance, drop this to the general 20% that I generally say, it is actually behind with the punch trunk, because we are losing a position where we could put a crit damage or a crit chance or such. And yeah, because we kind of need 30% headshot rate, and also actually as well, the Grupo would even be ahead at a 20% headshot rate versus the Fox's Prayer that we have there. But it's such a minimal difference that, yeah, for the Fox's Prayer part, I'd rather keep that in just to have access to that piece. And then, but if you're making it a Grupo piece, would actually be a decent, but it will be basically the same. Yeah, on this end though, with the punch trunk, having a 30% headshot rate just to break even, basically, I'd rather just have the general leaning more towards the crit side of things. And yeah, that influenced my choice to not put a punch trunk in here. Also, then we have the old version of this same 1.13. So this is the old version with the 2-piece Brazos and the Grupo piece. This is basically this build. This new build is doing, we're doing basically the inverse percentage here, 16% more. So it is basically under 14% behind, but the new build is basically doing 16% more with the same metrics here. If we actually put it to that 20% headshot rate, yeah, we are on that 16-ish% difference between the new versus the old. So this build got a pretty hefty upgrade. And I always already like this. If you were wondering what I'm using it for, mostly Summit, going with 7 directives, because yeah, we are running a pistol most of the time, or we're running a pistol. So yeah, both of the ammo directives can be there. Ragers, Fog of War, things like Fragile Armor and Hard to Earn aren't too big of an issue. I don't take no regen because, yeah, we're kind of relying on the Mementos regen to kind of keep us upright. So generally, we don't take no regen, or we do not take no regen. And we don't take the special ammo because yeah, disrupt rounds and disorient. Well, disrupt is deadly. Disorient is very annoying versus this build. Still, because yeah, if it hits the shield, it still disorients you. Then as well, we don't take scavenge skills because while we could do that actually and keep our shield up, I like being aggressive with it and just running towards the enemy and then pulling out my shield and then putting it away and running to the next one. We couldn't do that with scavenge skills, so yeah, we basically exclude those 3, and the rest we all can take, landing us on 7 directives in Summit, and I kind of like it for that. Also, it is very survivable. Also, this will be my test bed as well to kind of mess around with some imminence armors because this has decent enough damage. And I want to see actually if we're running this in a group, and we kind of did with the PTS a little bit, but I haven't kind of played around much with it since, where taking this, for instance, into some legendaries together with some striker builds and seeing if I take most of the aggro most of the time. Because this does do enough damage, I feel, with 100% threat on top, and if I'm closer to the enemy than my allies, I feel that should be able to, like, kind of take the aggro. But we'll see, actually. And in the future, I'll have a video on the effects of threat and aggro and kind of that system, both explaining it and seeing as well kind of what the results are of playing around with some 2-piece imminence armaments with the increased threat. But for the time being, yeah, I've been enjoying this build a lot. I already had the older version as the pistol build. This basically just got 16% better, 15%-ish better. And yeah, that's a pretty hefty upgrade. And then we'll go back one, actually, to 1.12. The reason we did that one first is that explains why this one is the way that it is, as this is the high-end AR TechTank. Now, I feel very strongly that the Striker TechTank, Heartbreaker TechTank, both are better than this by quite a lot. In this slot, in the 1.12 slot in the past, was the HeadHuntersFury TechTank. I felt the HeadHuntersFury, I was always, whenever I was running it, kind of bitching about it, as the thing was HeadHuntersFury didn't need the TechTank didn't need HeadHuntersFury parts, basically. They were too much, you know, too much survivability in one build, basically. HeadHuntersFury already has its own build in survivability with the armor and kill, and it's disorient. The TechTanks have their survivability in the shield and such. So I took that one away. That became an X build. Now, this one actually we used to have in the past, and this is exactly, of course, the layout we were kind of talking about a second ago with the Picaros there as well, and the Grupo and the Barazos. And actually, that build with the DNH chest, I would swap it over to becoming an AR version by just putting this chest piece in there. That's also why layout-wise it was set up that way, just so the chest swapped, and I would swap the Bulwark to a Crusader, and we would just main the AR from that point. And I wanted to keep that build, but of course, with the Imminence Armaments pieces coming in, it would have been not just one piece swapping out, and of course, this chest is just from my Striker build, so this will always be there on the character. So I wanted to keep that, and that's the choice we went with. So I basically kept the old layout, because of course, yeah, for the AR, the Imminence Armaments wouldn't make the difference. And that old layout is now then 1.12. And this, while one of the weaker tech tanks, it is enough to do any like activities and such with, doing the scouts with and such. And mostly I just want to have a tech tank on every character, and this definitely fits that bill. But yeah, basically bringing one back just because it made sense. And also this way, it's kind of saving a few pieces. That's also one of the reasons we went, for instance, with this Fox's Prayer on the other build as well, just so it can also live in this build together with the same memento, saving me a few places and a few pieces on this character's inventory as they were getting quite full. And next up, we'll go to the only change on character 2 on 2.01, the Aces build on them. And this always has existed. I've always had an Aces build, at least in the in the collection. In the past, it was actually like this. It was a perfect focus with headshots. And then, actually, yeah, with the SVD. Now, when they changed it to becoming a rifle set as well, I was trying it out with rifles. We were going with a crit chance, crit damage route together with, I think it was with a sacrifice and a gift with crit chance, crit damages as well. And we were trying to make it work with a rifle. Now, it turns out that, yeah, in general, rifles aren't in a great place, but also Aces just isn't really helping the matters there, because an Umbra build, an OD build, or a negotiator build with rifles is just going to outdo this consistently. And that's kind of a problem for aces. It could use a buff, definitely on the rifle end and such, even on the MMR end. But what I found already in the past that I quite enjoy is, for instance, running it, with focus, running it with focus weapons, and then actually, especially running it with, for instance, the Dread Edict or an SVD, and trying to, get as many headshots out and fast firing. Now, one of the things I wanted, one of the reasons I wanted to go back to this version as well is, we had gotten the handbasket in the meantime. And the handbasket, of course, kind of somewhat slower firing. And of course, it is actually the same 60 RPM as the other bolt actions. But because you have the scope in time as well on the bolt actions, where the handbasket doesn't scope out, especially, well, we are running a scope here with it. Because of that, it is actually faster effectively, because you can you fire, you hold the button down because it is also full auto, and you just try to keep it on their head, or you try to find a new head to put it on. And the second the shot is ready, it will just fire again. Because of that, it is actually effectively faster than the bolt actions. And that means that I quite enjoy actually that play style of it, of just trying to pop heads and doing control points with this and just trying to put out basically, accurate massive fire is actually enjoyable. And not having to deal, for instance, with Headhunter, because with Headhunter, and especially without Determined with Headhunter, I kind of find it frustrating quite often where you can't kind of shoot weak points because you're going to lose your stacks, or, you just lose your stacks on hitting the turret on the back of a hyena engineer instead of hitting his head and stuff. I find that quite frustrating, actually, and that's why I don't enjoy playing Headhunter builds so much for myself. Determined, of course, kind of alleviates that, but then I find Determined running it, I'm okay with running it just to grind and just, if I need to do a bunch of control points very quickly, I might pick that. But I find myself not wanting to do that often. It becomes pretty just boring is kind of the simple way to describe it, just because it lacks any of the challenge pretty quickly. But then this build, actually, I quite enjoy. Trying to extract the most out of this build, even though it isn't a great build, is enjoyable. And especially with the handbasket, trying to just go from head to head and try to land the shots. This build won't make it into the recommended build list or anything. It isn't good enough for that at all. But I have been enjoying it, and setting it back at least to becoming this version with the pristine example and a gift on it, and everything being towards headshot and weapon handling. And then as well, we can take the mods on the weapons, and that's also, of course, been a big change since the last time. As now having, for instance, instead of what this mods would be was 10% accuracy and 10% or 20% stability, now we have 30% accuracy and 40% stability from just those two mods. And that makes quite a difference, of course, also on the handling wise. And the handbasket, of course, just because it's firing slower. But of course, also we're kind of using it in a DPS sense almost here. We're trying to do a damage per second. We are actually trying to fire at the speed that the weapon can fire. The handbasket has horrendous DPS, especially in comparison to, for instance, the Dread Edict or such. But it makes this workable where, for instance, if we're trying to spam fire an SVD, it just doesn't work out well enough. This is one of those places where, actually hitting the shots matters. Then as well, actually, to point out the pristine example, here, of course, it is also giving us 10% marksman damage, so it is obviously the better choice for focus. But in general as well, if you're using focus on any build, generally the pristine example with perfect focus will beat any other piece that you could put there with normal focus. The only thing to keep in mind is that, when it isn't stacked, when you don't have the full stacks of focus, then, the other, if you're going with a Cheska with focus, that will beat it. But then that's also the thing. If you're running focus, you want to keep the uptime there, and then, you might as well go for that and go with a pristine. Build that I've kind of brought back basically was, we used to have a very similar version to this, just with a different weapon in the build collection. And I've been enjoying turning it back into this. And moving on to 3.09 in the collection. And with the coming in of Eminence Armaments, of course, with the 3-piece being 60% pistol, It was inevitable to at least try out putting it with Hunter's Fury for a Headhunter's Fury, but then here with the Imminence Armaments, and then of course we need the Ninja Bike to get the 3-piece and the Imminence and the 3-piece and a 4-piece of a Hunter's Fury. This layout-wise ends up working about as well on the damage end of things as a Memento, with the Memento version being a Memento with a DNH chest and a 4-piece of Hunter's Fury alongside of it. With it being fully charged up on the Memento. Now, of course, when the Memento is also fully charged up, we're also getting regen. We're also, getting the pickups and then bonus armor from that and extra weapon damage from that. And also we're getting a much stronger shield because we're getting skill efficiency, which translates into skill health, which helps the shield quite a bit. So here we are without those benefits, but there's the other end of the things where with a Memento, yeah, you don't want to die. For instance, first of all, dying is a lot more impactful, but also you can't, for instance, go to New York or Brooklyn or back to DC or such, or offsite without losing your stacks. Of course, if you're doing, for instance, some priority objectives and they do send you to a different map, you want to be able to just do that. And actually, I kind of like it for that. Also going to any of the safe houses, giving us extra places we can fast travel to without losing, without having to think about our Memento stacks. If we can keep around the same damage, that's actually not too bad. And I've been quite enjoying having an extra basically Headhunter for character 3, where they didn't have a pistol Headhunter. And the pistol Headhunters are definitely strong and pretty potent nowadays, of course, have been for quite a while. Here then as well, we have a damage calculation at the ready. We'll zoom it into the correct way. Recently actually as well, I already had, of course, some Headhunter calculators for the MMR, compare basically the DP on the DPS tables, although they're not doing DPS per se, we're doing Headhunter, basically looking at the first shot, second shot, cap shot. I've actually been making this was kind of as well the test bed for this, of making a Headhunter multi-calc, and there's actually now a Headhunter and a skill damage multi-calculator in the calculator folder. And we'll actually cover those in a future video. We'll go over actually and only tips on the multi-calculators, and then also lay out all 3 of them and how to fill them in. And one thing we ran into here, one thing I wasn't too well aware of, and actually asking around, not many are actually, it seems. And one of the things is we generally don't calculate out Headhunter too much. We just use it. We just make the build, use it, and you can compare the numbers. You can just A/B compare them with different pieces, because it's usually not too hard to set them up to actually get the numbers out of them. But it turns out that actually, as it kind of says here, double dip ? And then with some 20s, that 20 is the Hunter's Fury proximity buff. And on the second shot, it is actually somewhat, you could consider double dipping. So there is, of course, the shot that we're taking at the time. That is a number. And especially with Headhunter, on the second shot, what would be is the first shot, which if we're not critting or anything, is going to be the same as the second shot, basically. But on the stored amount, basically, it would be the stored amount of the first shot plus having the second shot times 1.25 or 1.50, depending on which Headhunter you're running, perfect or normal. And that would be it. It would be just that, the shot, the main shot, and then also the previous shot times 1.5, for instance, for perfect Headhunter. In that stored amount, actually, the Headhunter is also there another time as a 1.2 multiplier, meaning that it is, of course, already in the shot. So it is times 1.5 times 1.2, and that means it's kind of double there in the stored amount. And also it goes into the cap in the same way, where we generally say it is weapon damage, total weapon damage, and then DTH and DTA. It turns out that the Hunter's Fury proximity, the 20%, is also going actually into the stored amount of the cap. That's actually the reason it is a little bit higher. And actually, me not knowing that in the past, I've been frustrated trying to calculate out Headhunter. Headhunter is sometimes a little bit quirky, especially when you start adding in DTA into the mix. Without DTA, it's a little bit more clean, but even then, I was running into issues, for instance, with HeadHuntersFury, and I didn't know this in the past. And I would just go like, screw it, I'll just shoot at the range. But it turns out that, yeah, actually there is a quirk there that was hitherto unknown to me. But now I know, and yeah, we'll spread the word around. And I feel actually, yeah, very few people knew that, even though instinctively it was there, because if we actually compare the numbers of a HeadHuntersFury, it seems to be exceeding what you would expect from it numbers-wise, because it has less stats than the high-end version, but is doing more. So this is that reason. It is actually the proximity buff is going into the cap and is going into the second shot in a pretty meaningful way. Then here, yeah, we have kind of the different setups for it. And in this as well, I went kind of with how we can kind of set it up, even though, of course, we don't really have too many choices there. Because, yeah, if we take it to the game for a second, we have 2 pieces of Minions Armaments and 3-piece HeadHuntersFury. We don't want the chest, of course, to be HeadHuntersFury, because that wouldn't work out for us here. We want it to be Headhunter. So that's going to be an Eminence Armaments piece. The Ninja Bike is going to go in. This Eminence Armaments piece on the mask could be any of the other slots. I've just picked here for it to be the mask, just because I find it aesthetically pleasing. For an L shape, usually you will see this as well with some of, for instance, yeah, the tech tanks and stuff being laid out in that way. And then, yeah, on the numbers end, especially comparing it as well to, for instance, other versions of the build. And here, for instance, we have the Memento, and that's actually the comparison part here that we're kind of concerning ourselves with the Memento charged up, as we see here, and HeadHuntersFury at 5 stacks. Because, yeah, we have that on-kill buff, of course, for HeadHuntersFury, and that is a self-multiplicative 1.05 up to 5 stacks that lands on this 27 and 63. So actually, if we are at that full 5 stacks, this actually outdoes the Memento by a tiny amount. Or, well, actually a reasonable amount, but both of them as well, especially with high grading. So this is with grade 30. On the second shot, can actually deal with once we have actually multiple kills going, which is actually the thing. We won't have that. So the better number to compare is the second number. And yeah, there we don't have enough, for instance, to deal with elites on the second shot. And that's kind of the downside of this kind of build. The high end, for instance, with vigilance and such, bringing in vigilance means that we, on the second shot, with higher enough grading, with Eminence Armaments, we can actually have the second shot be an elite. Because here, this would be the middle one here, and the second one here would be before we have HeadHuntersFury stacks. We would have one HeadHuntersFury stack at this point, of course, and that wouldn't be enough to make a difference to get this up to the amounts of like 9.8-ish that we would need for an elite kill. If we were to have 5 kills beforehand, yeah, we would, but also if we had 5 kills, we would already be on the cap shot, right? So, but definitely on the first shot, both of them as well are plenty enough to start on a red, but yeah, this would need to go red, purple, elite, for instance. But that's quite fine. We are getting some tiers, for instance, with the shield for that instead of the vigilance that we would have on HeadHuntersFury. And I feel either going basically the classic version where we have a DNH backpack and a chain killer plus 4 pieces HeadHuntersFury, or going the Memento or this version. All 3 are basically perfectly viable things to choose and work out more than well enough. You can definitely use these on heroic. And yeah, numbers-wise, they end up pretty well. Not, of course, yeah, it's still not to the degree, as we'll see in a second, with the high end, for instance, that nowadays on the second shot can deal with an elite on that second shot. But overall, I've been enjoying quite a bit running around with this layout, and it works out perfectly fine. That's always the thing that the Ninja Bike kind of needs, is brands that really complement it. And here, of course, having 60 pistol damage is a lot and makes enough of a difference that this will be the second Ninja Bike build in the collection alongside of the high-end TechTank, which has kind of similar traits, or a high-end Headhunter TechTank with the 1886. This has similar traits where we have enough brand bonuses available to us, and especially with Headhunter scaling off of weapon damage, that, yeah, it can make sense sometimes to put in a Ninja Bike. And we'll very briefly go to 3.10. There's actually only one thing changed here. This is the Umbra setup, the full red variant. And in the build collection and also with the numbers of it, I was already kind of stating that I had it with a Fenris backpack before this. I was like, maybe I should lean towards actually just putting in a chest cam. Nowadays, with high enough grading, especially if we take it up to 30 grading, that Fenris difference kind of falls away, and actually having Cheska here doesn't break this, especially because nowadays as well, of course, we can have multiple crit damage mods that are equivalent. Here then we're setting up the weapon with 1 crit chance mod and 2 crit damage mods, and this could as well still work, for instance, for a FAMAS and such, because yeah, for instance, things like the FAMAS can't take 3 crit damage mods because the underbarrel on them isn't actually a long rail. And they can't take the crit damage mod, they're only the crit chance one. But in this layout, I feel it kind of works perfectly fine. We're hitting this 50, leaving a perfect gap kind of for the Coyote at the mid-range, but of course we'll lose out a little bit on especially the close range and the long range buffs of it. But that's a sacrifice we're kind of willing to make there. And putting in a Cheska, in this case, kind of brings us universality. So we can either use it with LMG or rifles or ARs, or even try to stick in an SMG, because we could actually stick in an SMG here with one crit chance mod. It would actually be 25, and then we could have it be as a close range Umbra, but then Umbra doesn't lean itself too much for close range play. I feel it's much more of an ambush build, kind of a mid-ranger, even some would say a long ranger. So yeah, a small minor change to this build, but I just wanted to highlight it here. And then we go to a build that actually did not receive a change, but we're going to discuss it anyway. As quite often the question comes up of how does this build in this layout with the 2-piece Cheska compare against the Ninja Bike plus Cavalier? Now, as you can see already, the Ninja Bike plus Cavalier version, actually, we're kind of putting it in the corner here as an option. So as you might guess, it is actually viable to do so, and has benefits, especially if you're wanting to have some blue cores, for instance, or at least some tiers for the shield. If you are going full red, this is kind of the better version, will be the conclusion in a second. If we take it to the numbers that we have here on that first multi-calculator that we had, where we had the pistol TechTank. If we kind of scroll down, we have actually, the 1.13 is the version that we have in the build collection with the 2-piece Cheska. And then as well, with both of them, we're keeping an obliterate chest. Now, of course, you could move it to become a striker chest. The numbers in percentage difference wouldn't per se change, because that would mostly change this multiplier. Would just lose this 20% weapon total weapon damage, and we would gain 180 on the back, or well, 180 or 130, because yeah, we have a Ninja Bike version going up against. And the thing is, especially there, both of them are of course full red, but the full red version with the 2-piece Cheska versus the Ninja Bike, especially because the Ninja Bike is eating up the Talon slot, of course, on the backpack. And the Striker backpack is still pretty strong. It isn't, of course, as strong as it used to be, but it is still pretty strong. And what we see then is with that Ninja Bike and then 1-piece Cavalier as a replacement, we are actually dropping around 10% with the metrics that we've chosen here, with 20% headshot rate. And at 0 stacks, and then we have it kind of as this at 0 stacks at, oh yeah, actually no, so it's the other way around. At 0 stacks, at 50 stacks, yeah, and at 100 stacks. As to both the Backfire and then also Striker itself. So we can kind of see actually at empty stacks that the Cavalier version is a tiny bit ahead, because we're of course gaining more from the talent on the backpack. So here it is actually a tiny bit ahead before we do any stacking on the first shot, basically. But even already at 50% kind of stacked, it's already leaning towards the version without the Ninja Bike. And then of course at full, we are definitely doing more damage without the Ninja Bike. But it is a big but. We are getting a blue and a yellow from that Ninja Bike. This damage differential is coming at, there is a benefit there as well with the blue and the yellow extra there. Stacking wise and stuff, we still need to, of course, stack to the same amounts, either 100 or 200 stacks of striker. So that doesn't change. And if you are going actually blue or yellow, one thing that you would care about is, for instance, would the other one fare versus this, and it would lose. If you're putting a blue and a yellow on the version, on the Backfire version that we have there, and we can kind of do that here. If we take this to 100, losing 2 cores, basically the Ninja Bike version is actually ahead. Now, of course, on that one, we could take 2 blue cores. If we only care about the shield, 2 blue cores is going to be better. The shield is going to be the same, but we would be a little bit more chunky ourselves because that yellow isn't per se that useful there. A blue would actually be more useful. So there's that to be said there. But yeah, basically, if we're taking those 2 blues, then yeah, we're kind of even there. And of course, now it would lose on basically all the other metrics because here it was behind as well. And then it's even more behind. But at full stacks, if we're taking 2 blue, consider, or taking 2 or more blues, because yeah, if we're also taking even more than that, and especially for this season, there is some reasons to do so. If we're doing that, then yeah, the Ninja Bike actually makes a little bit of sense here as well. And next we'll go to 4.04 build not found. But all joking aside, build is now an MA here, a measured assembly setup, of course, a new gear set of this season. This is kind of the layout I settled upon, but this might see several revisions still. As you may notice here, we're going with the chest and without the backpack. It is just overall looks like, of course, the layout from an FI, basically, but then with 2 extra blue cores. And in the same way as FI, we would normally have 4 pieces of FI, a BTSU, and then a setup as the backpack slot. Now, in the game, actually, it is saved like this. It is saved with 5 pieces. As also in the build picture, as you saw there, the backpack is there, of course, as one of the options. Especially this backpack can situationally make a lot of sense. This is that decreasing the cooldown of the destruction of mortars and enemy skills. This is especially enemy proxies and such that we care about a lot. And that will take that down from each 10 seconds to 1 second. In general play, so if we're just using as this kind of a healer, maybe in a group setting or such, for instance, or maybe even in legendary and such, I find that 10 seconds being more than good enough. It deleting, for instance, the mini tanks every 10 seconds isn't, well, it is much faster with the backpack. It is also, then we're losing the setup debuff, the opportunistic, perfect opportunistic, we're losing that. So that does come at a cost if we do make that choice. So I've been kind of leaning at as like a general use case to go with an opportunistic backpack, but there's definitely a case to be made for the measured assembly backpack. That's also why we're kind of saving it like that. I've been liking the chest so much that I kind of want to keep the chest, especially if we're using it with smart cover. As long as we are overcharged, and this of course changes the cooldown of how quickly we can be in that overcharged state by 15 seconds, which is also maybe questionable if that's well worth it or not. But for the time being, I've gone this route. And here, especially with when the smart cover is overcharged, we gain another 8 damage to targets out of cover from that and 25 weapon handling. So I feel it's kind of worth it for that, and also a bigger radius, making it easier for people to kind of be in it. And then I feel if I want to go the backpack route, I'm kind of going this way, where we're actually sticking in an improvised piece. Now, the improvised piece is a little bit much. You could just go with either a Hani U piece, because here actually I have it with skill haste, but especially as well now that the first piece of Alps is 18 repair skill. If we wanted more repair skill, we could also just stick that in the mod slot here. And that would be also 2 more than that, because also against a Hani U piece, that would have 10% from its brand bonus. Here we have 12% from a mod. So the improvised piece kind of makes sense for that. But of course, it's a little bit of an expensive piece to get there for that slot. I had one lying around already anyway, so I kind of ran with that. And then here as well, we have the BTSU for the Hive. We're going to be wanting to run the Hive and the smart cover. Both affect the tiering that we can get from measured assembly. So those two skills are kind of locked in. I feel if I'm going Hive, I'm still going BTSU. And even though we are overcharging ourselves quite a lot, of course, with this gear set, the BTSU is a group-wide overcharge. And because of that, I do feel it has some value there. So we can supercharge our allies, resetting their hives, giving them powerful skills to kind of, you know, deal with the enemy a little bit. And then we're pelting the enemy with some opportunistics, and then here and there deleting a skill instead of deleting all of the all of the enemy skills and proxies and things like that. Measured assembly already, having seen what it can do, for instance, in the Lovebird fight, but there you would definitely want to have the backpack, where it can just delete the drone, it can delete the healing box that gets put down, it can delete the sniper turrets, it can delete the shock traps, all of the things that would make that fight a lot less consistent, those can get deleted. Now, of course, versus FI would give 25% total weapon damage to all allies and yourself, as long as it's full health. That in that fight basically translate, because mostly we'll be running chest strikers there, that would translate into, and yeah, the builds that the other people are running, they don't have any total weapon damage. So that would translate into basically a 25% damage increase for your teammates. And this would definitely then be 25% slower because that FI could be running the same smart cover, of course, alongside of it. It isn't just for this gear set. But then this could make it a lot more consistent because, yeah, if you're speedrunning it, you want that 25%. But if you are just doing it and you want the completion, a consistent 25% slower is actually going to be worthwhile. And I feel there is a place for this, for that. And also, in, for instance, legendaries and such, yeah, it does eat up the drones. It doesn't eat up the airburst and such. So yeah, it does actually has a place. And likely in the future, we'll showcase what this can do. And last, but definitely not least, is the high-end Headhunter for pistols, as we have it here. And that, of course, has gotten a big upgrade in the 3-piece Imminence armaments as well, as, yeah, slotting 3 of those in makes quite the difference. The layout that I settled on in the end was going this route, where we have a punch trunk, a chain killer, a Dodge City Gunslinger holster, and then 3-piece Imminence armaments on the right side here, keeping the vigilance there. This went from having the gift, contractors, and Fox to this. And what we especially gain here is that on the second shot with the chain killer, and that's why we are going with the chain killer. On the second shot, we can have it deal with an elite, which in the past was impossible for this build, especially with the harvest. And that's why we would have to basically have the Dodge City in there. Now we could remove the Dodge City actually, and even then, still on the second shot, we could deal with an elite. So we could, 2 or 3 shot an elite, and then from that point on, deal with other elites. But I like having the Dodge City holster. It is, to me, actually the thing that I like running the high-end version for, just to have the Dodge City. But now, if we miss on that first shot, it isn't completely end of game, basically. Because in the past, yeah, especially with the regulars, you can make a big explosion happen. But if you missed that first shot and you didn't get a HeadHunter stack off of it, it was actually quite annoying. You would have to find your second shot a red or a purple, and yeah, that wasn't always available, especially with that. So that made that first shot kind of, you had to hit it, kind of stressful, and I didn't enjoy it too much for that. Now, that first shot, we still have it, and we can hit pretty hard. Of note, because the bonuses are different here, the increase to this is actually, this is a decrease on the Dodge City shot, as, yeah, that has actually dropped by a little bit versus the older version, but we're gaining that back basically in the stacking of it. So if you really do care about the Dodge City shot, and this going from a 15 to a 17 million-ish, for instance, with Harvest, with the same amount of grading, then yeah, the Dodge going with the older version might make sense for you. But I feel overall the gain that we have in especially the stacking buff makes enough of a difference that I'm going to lean towards this, and this is going to become the way that I present this build. Also, this is honestly easier pieces to get because Imminence Armaments does come with red cores, and yeah, that means that this is just 3 pieces to get even easier than, for instance, yeah, a Fox's Prayer and a Contractors and such, and especially, of course, the gift that we used to have in there. But this doesn't, yeah, in all ways super plant the old version of the build, because yeah, Dodge City shot is actually lower for this version. That Fox's Prayer and that Contractors actually, yeah, would make enough of a difference to bring up this this number by a decent amount. But yeah, this new version, and actually to show the calculation sheet why we went with this version in the end, as we'll go to this one and then actually zoom in a little bit. And yeah, we have a kind of a messy multi-calculator here. And actually, yeah, the versions that are now in the damage calculator folder are a little bit cleaner than this, and also have a third shot in there. So here we have the Harvest and the Regulus, and we have different versions. So the old way is the old way. Here though, we don't have the Dodge City shot, so yeah, we're not comparing that. But you can actually, the old build picture is there as an X build. You can just compare the numbers there. And then for Regulus and with Harvest, and then especially I had two ways in mind of going about it, and one was to take, instead of chain killer, take an Imminence Armaments piece here, and then with a Fox's Prayer. That would especially improve the first shot. And then the other option was to have a chain killer. And what I found once we ran the numbers a little bit here is that especially that first shot doesn't make too big of a difference. We do have 200k difference there here with 30 grading. But if we take it with the second shot for an elite, we need 8.89 for solo scaled elite enemy. And the Fox's Prayer version just barely doesn't reach that. It doesn't reach it with the Regulus, but not with a Harvest with Determined, which is, of course, kind of the thing that a lot of people will lean towards. And because of that, I've gone with the Chain Killer version. So with the Chain Killer, we are still, on the first shot, we can drop an red, we can two-shot a purple, we can three-shot an elite. And then on the second shot, as long as we don't lose vigilance or such, so yeah, we don't need, on any of those shots, we need to, keep our shield up and just have that take the hits, or just, kill them pretty quickly. But on the second shot, once we, for instance, drop a red, the second shot can be an elite. And that is actually quite a big upgrade for this build. That makes it much more consistent, even without triggering the Dodge City shot. And what I found is that, where in the past, if I missed that first Dodge City shot and we're doing a public executions and there's a lot of elites, it's actually quite annoying because you either need to have, the two reds or purples kind of in sight to kind of shoot them, but there's a lot of elites, of course, around. Now we can just have that second shot be an elite. And that is, to me, a worthwhile investment to taking that Chain Killer version. And that's actually the reason I lean towards that. Now, of course, with a Regulus, if you're just using a Regulus and that's the weapon that you use, both of them would also kind of be in the similar state. So with that one, even the Fox's Prayer version, so if you're going with the Imminence Armaments chest, there, and of course the difference there is that we're getting perfect Headhunter versus normal Headhunter. Perfect Headhunter doesn't have a higher cap or anything, but it stacks faster to that cap. Instead of 125% of the last shot being kind of stored, it's storing 150% with the Chain Killer. And that's the difference maker here. But then, of course, we do lose a little bit on the first shot, because the Fox's Prayer would add a lot more into that shot. But also, not that much. It is a 300k difference. This wouldn't be a meaningful difference, and this wouldn't be a meaningful difference. So you could kind of go either way with the Regulus. And that's why I've kind of decided in the end of things to, go this route where we have a Dutch City Ulcer, Chain Killer, Punch Trunk, and then 3-piece Imminence Armaments on the right side of the build. I feel that fits it pretty well, especially if we are choosing to go Harvest with Determined, with a little bit of grading. We can have our second shot be an elite. And that brings us actually to the end of this build collection update video. We didn't do too many. We got to take our time with some of them here as well. As it's basically a new brand set and a new gear set came in, so we had a few builds centered around those, a few minor changes here and there, and also just a few reworks that I've been meaning to do just because some builds weren't working out the way I wanted them to, like with the Aces. And then as well, actually, we didn't cover everything here because there's a ton of minor changes. Of course, Caretaker, for instance, made it into a bunch of build pictures just because it is a worthwhile weapon to use, especially if you don't have the Lexington, and was available at the start of the season. So a lot of people do have that at least, so they can use that one. And of course, a bunch of just minor corrections here and there, as yeah, sometimes the stats might have not lined up with actually the gear and such in very minor cases, and then I went through and fixed those, and yeah, we did find a bunch of small errors, as always. It is, of course, yeah, it is just human error that can creep into it pretty quickly. And as always as well, if you notice anything off in here or you have any big questions or such, feel free to actually reach out to me either here in the comments or on the Discord where I linger quite a bit. So you can always post your questions there, or even if you find some faults or errors and such, feel free to DM me, for instance, if you need to. As yeah, there's always going to be a few mistakes in here, and that's just the reality, but if they're found, we'll do our best to I'll do my best to fix those up. And yeah, that brings us to the end of this. For future videos, we're going to go actually into the build collection, or no, we have the build collection updates, of course, here. We're going to go into the global modifier only tips. As yeah, I do want to make a shorter version of that one just to go over some of the picks that we can do, but just in a shorter form, not as a short. And yeah, medium mats, of course. And as we were talking here as well, I want to make a video on how to use the multi-calculators and how to set them up, especially as well. We've added in 2 new ones in there with Headhunter one and a skill damage calculator. So you can use those already, but we'll explain how they work if you want to try to use them in the future. And also, yeah, we'll start spooling up towards doing an Eclipse Masterclass, Fire Eclipse Masterclass specifically. One of my earliest videos was exactly that already. I want to do a redo. I want to do basically a 2025 edition of it, as that one is a little bit out of date. It's from the time of Golan, for instance, to give away how old it is. Yeah, nowadays, of course, Electric is much better pick for it. But yeah, those will be upcoming. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below, as it does help out. So I'll do a little bit of shilling here. I hope to catch you in those future videos. And as always, have a good night.